Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
The cool morning air bit at my skin as I stepped out of my house, the quiet suburb still in the grip of sleep. Saturdays always began like this. The same walk, the same weight pressing on my chest. I carried the white lilies close to me, their fragrance mingling with the crisp autumn air as I made my way toward the cemetery, the familiar ache growing with every step. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked through the iron gates. Each step felt heavier than the last. The cemetery was as silent as ever. Rows of headstones lined up in a stoic procession, each one guarding its own share of untold stories. Mine, though, was different. My story with Janice felt unfinished, like a book abruptly slammed shut in the middle of a chapter. The fire had taken her too soon, and since then, the only words exchanged were the quiet apologies I whispered to the wind. As I approached her grave, the lilies clutched tighter in my hands, my breath caught in my throat. There she was, beneath the cold, unfeeling earth. "Hi, Janice," I said softly, the familiar opening to my weekly monologue. "It's me." Another Saturday. I knelt down and placed the lilies carefully by the headstone. My hands lingered on the cold stone, tracing the letters of her name. Janice Carter, beloved wife. The guilt flooded back, as it always did. I could never shake the feeling that I had failed her. I wasn't there when she needed me most. "I'm sorry," I whispered, as if the words would somehow change the past. I should have been there. I should have listened. A gust of wind rustled the leaves around me, as if Janice was answering, though silence always followed. I bowed my head, running through the memories of our final weeks together. The arguments, the distance, the way her eyes had started to lose their warmth whenever I left for another business trip. If only I'd noticed sooner. Then my gaze caught something, a flash of red among the white lilies. I blinked, my heart skipping a beat. Nestled beside my flowers was a fresh bouquet of red roses. My stomach twisted. Who else had been here? I stood up slowly, staring at the roses, trying to make sense of them. Janice hadn't had many close friends, not that I knew of, at least. Her family lived too far away to visit regularly. So who was leaving these? I heard footsteps approaching from behind, and for a moment, my breath hitched in my throat. I turned quickly, half expecting to confront the mystery visitor, but instead, it was a woman, an elderly lady walking her small dog through the cemetery's paths. She smiled softly as she passed, and I relaxed. Still, the unsettling feeling remained. The roses felt like an intrusion, a reminder that I wasn't the only one with ties to Janice's past. I gathered myself and left the cemetery. The image of those red roses burned into my mind. As I walked, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, Janice had secrets I hadn't uncovered. The next day came, Sunday. I made an exception to the rule and went to the cemetery. On the way, I needed to buy flowers. By the time I reached Cecilia's flower shop, the sense of unease had grown. The shop, with its bright display of colors, felt out of place with the weight in my chest. The bell jingled as I pushed open the door, and Cecilia looked up from behind the counter, her kind eyes immediately softening. "Morning, Adam." She greeted me with a warm smile. "Lilies again today." I hesitated, the usual response stuck in my throat. For some reason, the lilies didn't feel right today. The image of those roses haunted me. "Actually, no," I said, my voice quieter than usual. "I'll take some red roses this time." Cecilia's eyebrows raised slightly in surprise. "Red roses? That's a change." She didn't pry, though. She simply turned and began gathering the roses from the cooler, her movements fluid and practiced. I watched her arrange the bouquet. The rich red petals, a stark contrast to the pale lilies I usually chose. "Someone else has been leaving roses at her grave," I muttered, more to myself than to Cecilia. "I don't know who." Cecilia glanced up, her hands still busy with the flowers. "Do you think it was a friend of hers?" I shrugged, though the knot in my stomach said otherwise. "Maybe, but I thought I knew all her friends. It's just strange. Cecilia paused for a moment, then wrapped the bouquet in delicate white paper. Grief brings people together in unexpected ways. Adam, she said gently, handing me the roses. Maybe it's someone who cared for her, but never had the chance to say goodbye. I took the bouquet, her words echoing in my mind. Maybe, I murmured, though something still didn't sit right. As I left the shop, I caught Cecilia's gaze one last time. There was a quiet understanding there, a compassion that made the heavy burden I carried feel just a little lighter. The next Saturday came faster than I expected. The week had dragged on with the usual monotony of work, but the thought of those red roses gnawed at me. Who could it be? The question replayed in my mind over and over as I drove towards the cemetery. I had decided that today I wouldn't leave until I got some answers. The air was crisp, and the sky, overcast, felt appropriate for the weight sitting on my chest. As I pulled up to the cemetery gates, I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was still earlier than usual. If anyone else was visiting Janice's grave, I had a good chance of finding out today. I parked the car and stepped out, my eyes scanning the area as I made my way down the familiar path. My pulse quickened when I neared her grave. There they were again, red roses, freshly placed. Someone's been here, I thought, my heart pounding in my chest. I crouched down and traced the petals with my fingers, my thoughts racing. There was something about these flowers that felt too personal. Whoever was leaving them had a connection to Janice that I couldn't explain. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I froze. Slowly, I stood and turned, my pulse racing. A man stood a few feet away, his eyes fixed on me. He looked about my age, maybe a bit younger, with a calm demeanor and an air of quiet sadness about him. "You're Adam, aren't you?" he asked, his voice steady but low. I stared at him, unsure of how to respond. "I am," I replied, trying to mask my confusion. "Who are you?" The man took a step closer, his gaze softening. "I'm Brian," he said, the name landing like a punch to my gut. I knew Janice. Knew her. I repeated, my stomach twisting. "How?" Brian hesitated, his hand rubbing the back of his neck. We were close. Friends, I suppose. But, well, it became more complicated than that. His words trailed off as his eyes flicked toward Janice's grave. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the storm brewing inside me. "What do you mean, complicated?" My voice was harder now, but I needed answers. Real answers. Brian swallowed hard, stepping closer to stand next to me by the grave. "She and I grew close while you were away," he admitted, his eyes full of something between guilt and regret. "It started as just talking. She was lonely, struggling. Your marriage wasn't in a good place, and I was there for her." My heart felt like it was going to explode in my chest. "She never said anything to me about this," I managed to say, my voice tight with disbelief. I wasn't sure if I was more shocked or angry. Brian nodded slowly, understanding my reaction. "She was planning to," he said quietly. "Before the fire, Janice wanted to ask for a divorce. She thought it would be best for both of you." The words hit me like a freight train. Divorce? I had spent these years clinging to guilt, thinking I could have saved our marriage if I'd stayed, if I'd been there more. But to find out that she was ready to end it all before the accident, it shattered everything I believed. "She was going to meet you at the airport that day," Brian continued, his voice steady but full of emotion. "She wanted to talk things through in person. She wanted to tell you everything." I felt dizzy, the world spinning around me. "Why are you telling me this now?" I demanded, my voice harsher than I intended. "Why wait year?" Brian sighed deeply, looking away for a moment before meeting my eyes again. "Because you deserve to know the truth, Adam. You've been carrying this guilt for too long. Janice wouldn't want that for you." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I stared at the headstone, the memories of our marriage flickering in my mind like old photographs. Each one distorted now, colored by the truth Brian had revealed. "I don't know what to say," I muttered, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me. I thought she loved me. "She did," Brian said softly. "But sometimes, love isn't enough to hold things together." His words hung in the air, a bitter truth that I wasn't ready to accept. I glanced at the roses again, suddenly feeling like I didn't belong there anymore. This grave wasn't mine to mourn at. It was shared with someone else, someone who had been a part of Janice's life in ways I hadn't known. Brian shifted, his voice gentle but firm. "Adam, you need to let go. Janice wouldn't want you stuck here, tied to the past. She would want you to move on, to find peace." I nodded, but it felt mechanical, like my body was moving while my mind was still stuck in the past. I didn't know if I could ever let go, but standing there next to Brian, I realized that the story I'd been telling myself about Janice was far more complicated than I ever imagined. I watched Brian walk away, his figure slowly fading into the distance, and for the first time in years, I wasn't sure where to go from there. The next few days passed in a blur, my mind consumed by the revelation Brian had dropped on me. The truth felt like a stone lodged in my chest, heavy and unmovable. Everything I thought I knew about Janice, about our marriage, had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes. I replayed our last conversation before the fire over and over, searching for any hint of what Brian had revealed. There was none, just the usual tension, the kind that had become part of our daily life in those final months. By Friday night, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to confront the truth, face it head on, no matter how painful. I found myself standing outside Cecilia's flower shop, unsure of what I was even doing there. But something about the simplicity of flowers had always given me solace since Janice's passing. Maybe it was the way they symbolized life moving forward, even in the face of death. Or maybe I just needed a familiar face, someone who wasn't tangled in the web of my past. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. Cecilia looked up from behind the counter, her eyes brightening when she saw me. "Adam," she greeted me with a soft smile. "You're early this week." I nodded, shoving my hands into my coat pockets. "Yeah, I just needed to get out of the house." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of concern. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, then let out a heavy sigh. "No, not really. Can we talk for a minute?" Cecilia motioned toward a small table by the window. "Of course. Have a seat." We both sat down, the shop quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator where she kept the bouquets. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting patiently for me to speak, but I didn't know where to start. How do you tell someone that your entire marriage was a lie? Finally, I forced the words out. "I found out something. About Janice." I paused, unsure how much to share. "There's this guy, Brian. He knew her, apparently pretty well. He told me she was planning to ask for a divorce before the fire." Cecilia's eyes softened, and she leaned in slightly. "I'm so sorry, Adam. That must be incredibly hard to hear." "It's just, I had no idea," I continued, my voice strained. "I thought I was the one who had failed her, but now I don't even know what to think. Our whole marriage feels like a lie." Cecilia reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on mine. "It wasn't a lie. Whatever issues you and Janice had, it doesn't change the fact that there was love between you at some point. That doesn't just disappear." I looked at her, searching for something. Maybe hope, maybe understanding. But how do I move forward from this? How do I stop feeling guilty? Cecilia's gaze didn't waver. "You stopped by forgiving yourself. You loved her, and you did the best you could. Sometimes relationships fall apart, and it's not one person's fault. It's just the way life works." Her words settled over me like a blanket, warm but not fully comforting. I knew she was right, but accepting it was another matter entirely. Could I really let go of the guilt I'd been carrying for so long? "I don't know if I'm ready," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Cecilia smiled gently. That's okay. Healing takes time. But just know that it's possible. You don't have to carry this weight forever. I nodded, grateful for her words, even though the weight of truth still pressed heavily on my chest. Saturday came quickly, but this time I didn't feel the familiar dread of visiting Janice's grave. Something had shifted. The weight of Brian's revelation was still there, but Cecilia's words lingered in the back of my mind, offering a strange kind of comfort. Maybe I didn't have to do this alone anymore. When I arrived at the cemetery, the early morning fog still clung to the ground. I walked the familiar path to Janice's grave, my steps slow and measured. As I approached, I noticed Brian already there, standing by the headstone. My chest tightened with a mix of anger and curiosity, but I couldn't turn back now. I had to face this. Brian turned at the sound of my footsteps. His face was somber, yet calm, as if he had expected me. "Adam," he greeted, his voice quiet but steady. "I didn't think you'd be here this early." I stopped a few feet away from him, the cold air stinging my face. "I had to come," I said, my voice flat. "We need to talk." He nodded, stepping aside slightly as if to give me space. I moved closer to the grave, my eyes tracing the letters of Janice's name. For a moment, I said nothing, just letting the silence fill the gap between us. Finally, I spoke, my voice low. "Why didn't she tell me about the divorce?" Brian sighed, his expression softening. "She wanted to, Adam. She really did. But Janice wasn't good with confrontation. She thought telling you in person would be better than over the phone. She never got the chance." I felt a sharp pang in my chest. "And you knew this whole time." "I did," he admitted, his gaze lowering to the ground. "But it wasn't my place to interfere. I was there for her when she needed someone to talk to. That's all. That's all." My voice rose, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You were more than just someone to talk to, Brian. You loved her." He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked up, meeting my eyes with a mix of regret and something that felt like understanding. "I did love her," Brian said softly, "but it wasn't the kind of love that could have replaced what she had with you. She was lost, Adam. She was hurting. But she still cared about you. Don't doubt that." His words stung, but they also felt like a strange form of release. For the first time, I realized that Janice's death wasn't the result of my mistakes alone. She had her own struggles, her own decisions, and maybe I wasn't solely responsible for what had happened. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop punishing myself for something I couldn't change. As Brian walked away, I stood in silence for a while longer, staring at Janice's grave. The guilt wasn't gone, but it felt lighter. Perhaps, just maybe, there was a way forward after all. I stood outside the flower shop that Saturday morning, my hands shoved deep into my coat pockets, staring through the window at Cecilia as she arranged bouquets. Something felt different today, lighter. For the first time in years, the thought of heading to the cemetery didn't weigh me down. Perhaps Brian's words had begun to take root, or maybe it was the realization that I didn't have to face this alone anymore. I pushed open the door, the familiar chime welcoming me in. The scent of fresh flowers filled the air, mingling with the smell of morning coffee from the small cup beside Cecilia. She glanced up and smiled, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. "Good morning, Adam," she greeted, brushing her hands on her apron. "The usual?" I paused, considering her question. The usual. White lilies for Janice. The same routine, week after week. But today wasn't just another Saturday, was it? Actually, I began, stepping closer to the counter. I was thinking of something different today. Cecilia raised an eyebrow, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "Different? What did you have in mind?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I was truly ready for this change. But then I remembered Brian's words. "Forgive yourself. Move forward. Janice would want that." "A colorful bouquet," I said finally. "Something that represents a new beginning." Cecilia's smile widened, a warm, understanding look in her eyes. "I have just the thing," she said, turning to the rows of vibrant flowers behind her. "You've been through a lot, Adam. It's good to see you ready for a change." As she carefully selected each flower, arranging them with her usual grace, I watched her. There was something calming about the way she worked, the way she moved through life with a quiet strength. It made me wonder how I had missed it all these months, caught up in my own grief. When she was finished, she handed me the bouquet. Bright yellows, soft pinks, and deep reds blending together in a stunning display of life and renewal. "Perfect," I murmured, admiring the arrangement. Then, gathering the courage I'd been building for weeks, I looked up at her. "Cecilia, would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" Her hand stilled, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. For a moment, I feared I'd made a mistake, that I was moving too fast. But then, her expression softened into a smile, one filled with something more than just politeness. "I'd love to, Adam," she replied, her voice warm. "I think it's time for both of us to turn a new page." Relief washed over me, a sense of possibility unfolding before me like a path I hadn't seen before. I took the bouquet from her hands, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I'd carried for too long. "Thank you," I said quietly, meeting her gaze, "for everything." "Cecilia, this bouquet is for you. I really like you." Cecilia blushed and smiled. "Thank you, Adam. I like you too." Cecilia smiled again, a quiet understanding passing between us. "New beginnings aren't easy, Adam, but you're not alone in this." As I left the shop, the colorful bouquet in hand, I realized how true her words were. This wasn't just about letting go of the past. It was about embracing whatever came next. And for the first time in years, I was ready to do just that.